Hi, welcome to my quick sketch demo of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We're going to be focusing on some of the unique challenges and pluses of painting a more mature face. And of course, I begin with my usual very detailed drawing. Looks a bit like a topographical map where I'm outlining areas of value change, even putting outlines around areas that I plan to leave white of the paper. So step one begins with my burnt sienna and alizarin. And I'm going in, first of all, with just with some of the darker mix with the burnt sienna mixed with the alizarin and detailing a few of the areas that I don't want to lose when I start putting down the mid-tone washes. So I'm looking for the very darkest darks right now. So creases around the eyes, and some of the areas that read as the darkest values. Uh, I didn't used to do this step in this manner. I used to just start with the midtones, but there are occasions where I would lose those lines underneath, and it was difficult to have to think them through again. So it's easier to put the first pass on of the darkest darks, some of the darkest darks, lines that I was afraid that I might lose. So putting that crease line where the lips come together, and that's always a broken line. I'm using that little crease in her chin. I don't want to lose that. Some of these darker areas around the nose. Remember, this is the alizarin mixed with the burnt sienna, and I'm looking for the darkest dark areas that I'm afraid of losing when I come through with my midtones. So I'm putting some things down in the creases of the eyes. I'm not going to worry about the glasses until later, but step one is where I do burnt sienna and burnt sienna mixed with alizarin for the darkest darks. So I'm just trying to develop the shadow shapes here, looking for um, values, midtones to darker tones with the burnt sienna. I'll be adding value later as I come in with the arbitrary colors and with the flesh tones at the very last step. But this first step is always just mid to darker tones, burnt sienna and alizarin for the darker areas. So I'm stating these pretty uh, darkly. I'm not going to deal with the eyes. She has blue eyes. If a person has brown eyes, I tend to rough them in at this step, but I'm going to try to get all these creases and things, and then I'll come back in with the midtones. And the reason I've changed my method on this is because of being afraid of losing some of those darkest darks. I'm putting a few strokes in the eyebrows. Notice I try to make those brush strokes move in the direction that the eyebrow is actually growing. The reason I was putting those in is basically to see if I have a likeness. I really try to have a likeness in step one, and then I know that I'm ahead of the game moving on. I'm touching some of the spots that I've put this darker mixture in with a clean damp brush so that they don't become the attention getters. I'm breaking up the lines in a few spots and putting a little bit more in the eyebrows. Okay, they get lighter as they get out to the edge. I will be adding lots of other color into the eyebrow area, but I just want to make sure I have a likeness. So now I am just dealing with a pretty watery, I'd say tea to coffee water mixture of the burnt, or not a mixture, just the burnt sienna. And I'm mapping in the mid to darker tones right now with that burnt sienna. I try to make my strokes pretty deliberate, even at this stage, thinking about where the stroke will begin and where it will end. I'm just walking around the face looking for mid to darker tones. I tend to darken my photographs so that I have an easier time of this. Sometimes it's not easy to see the subtle variations in value. So right now it's just the burnt sienna. It's not the mix with the alizarin. I'm looking around the face. Now, some of the challenges, of course, in dealing with more mature faces are the wrinkle lines or any kind of line on the face. And I am very selective about which lines I'm going to include. And these lines between her eyebrows, I think, are important because they give you a bit of her expression. So I put them in with just the burnt sienna, and usually that's the way I'll leave them. I don't go in any darker with any other color. And I will touch those lines to break them up in spots just with a clean, damp brush so they don't become the star of the show. And I'm looking on the forehead at the various values I see there. Yeah, I try to walk around the face squinting as I go, so I'm more easily seeing those value shapes. Now, an added challenge with this portrait and with many portraits of more mature faces is dealing with glasses. And with Ruth, I decided to deal with some of that reflection that you see. So I'm going to have to be careful as I work inside the glasses area. First, just getting the tones. I'm trying to save that gleam over on the right-hand side. As I walk around, sometimes I get a little bit of a darker mixture, not a mixture, but just a little bit more pigment on the brush so that I have variety. I don't want just one tone of midtone. I want some variety in that. I love the shapes on the bottom of the nose. Those are midtones. I'm treating just the midtone area right now. I'll come in with some darker pigment in a bit to get a variety of values in here. And of course, there's a nice little shadow under the nose, and then some shadow down on the philtrum area that goes between the nose and the mouth. I treat the mouth the same as I treat the rest of the face. I look for shadow shapes in the lips, and I'm seeing the right-hand side of her mouth as a bit darkened. If you're curious about whether I've sped this up, um, part of this video is not speeded up at all, but this first step, I think I speeded it up 1.5 times, so it's not really much speeded up too much. I wanted you to be able to see the stroke work. And I see a bit of a shadow coming from the nose down that smile line. And I am, well, painting in that smile line, but I will break it up in a bit with a clean damp brush. I don't want it to be too harsh. And I'm putting in some midtones in that area right above where the chin begins to jut out. Now most of these tones will get either arbitrary color or flesh tones on top of them in spots, but some of them will be standing alone just as the burnt sienna. I try to merge shapes together like that shadow shape from the lip down into the shadow shape below. Walking around the chin area here. You don't really have to deal with too much of a neck area on this particular portrait since her collar's up so high. That's often a challenging area when you're dealing with mature skin. So I'm coming around to the side of her face. I always try to leave a lost edge somewhere where the jawline meets the neck. And you can see I've done that over on the right-hand side in a couple spots. I've got a lost edge. I do think a few of these little smile lines on her cheek are important. I'm not going to make them be the star of the show, but I did state those as separate lines. And when I'm putting down strokes on the cheek, I'm trying to indicate the way the cheek is shaped. I want my strokes to inform you of the shape of the face. And I've left my lines, my pencil lines on here pretty distinctly, partly just for the demo purposes. I usually would come through with a kneaded eraser and rough up those lines a bit, but I want you to be able to see them. And I decided she definitely needs some of those little details of wrinkles down to the left of her mouth. All this will dry a bit lighter anyway. But I want her to, at the end of step one, I need to see this face in 3 dimensions. So that's what we're going for here. So I'm darkening areas around the mouth and with my burnt sienna mixed with the alizarin. It takes a longer amount of time to do this step when I've got a more complicated face like this one. More nuances. I've got the glasses to deal with, looking for the subtle shapes, subtle variations in value. So you're watching this almost in real time. I'm going to put down more strokes to help inform you of the shape of her cheeks. I'm not dealing with every single little line and wrinkle. You need to simplify. You don't want the story to be, if that's not what you want the story to be. And I don't. I want to have Ruth's likeness. I want to indicate her age, but I don't want it to all be around about the lines and wrinkles. And I saw some variety in tones in the forehead, so I'm trying to get those in. It's easy to kind of ignore the forehead and its subtle value changes, and I don't want to do that because I need to have as much interest up there as I do in the rest of the face. Okay, where normally I would say I'm coming in on the home stretch here, but because it is a more complicated face, I'm taking my time and looking for as many value changes as possible. If I have hard edge, I do like to leave hard edges, but I will often come back in with a clean damp brush and touch that edge some in some spots just so that that doesn't become the attention getter. I don't want that tends to be what your eye focuses on uh, if it's not broken up in a spot or two. So just touching it lightly with a clean damp brush, going from the outside into the shape. So I'm still trying to work on forming her cheeks. She has a great face to paint. And I'm putting a few value changes down on her neck, but I don't want to create a harsh, unbroken line for the jawline. I still want to see some lost edges there, or the neck or the head looks like it's been pasted on. So I overshot a little bit down there at the bottom. Yep, there I am trying to scrub it out. This is just Canson sketch pad paper, or watercolor sketch pad paper. So it's not the fanciest, won't take much abuse, but it's great for doing these quick sketches. Now I'm coming in to kind of define some of the darker areas with the alizarin mixed with my burnt sienna. As you can see, my palette there, very messy, but it's all still pretty watery. I don't use any real, I don't use anything stronger than coffee water as far as the mixture of water to pigment goes. So stating some of the shadow shapes on the base of her nose. Trying to look and see if I've missed any spots. See some darker shadows where the glasses are touching the inside of the nose there. Sometimes I can't get the nostril areas as dark as I'd like, and I will touch that with a little bit of mineral violet or some kind of a warm violet at times. But you have to remember the inside of the nose, the nostril area is it's flesh, just like the inside of the mouth. And so you wouldn't want to come in with something cool or something like a blue if you're doing something more realistic like I am here. And I'm trying to figure out how to deal with those gleams that that are on the glass itself. So I'm trying to keep those lighter. I want to show the reflection uh, on the glass. Don't always show all of it, but I thought it was kind of important for her. And just restating some of the darkest darks. Maybe a little bit of that frowny line between the eyes. Wanted to state some of the darker information inside like the tear duct area called the caruncle, and just restating a few of the darkest lines that I kind of had lost with my midtones, but I could still see them because I had come in at the beginning and made those nice and dark. I don't want to do too much fiddling because I don't want things to look over painted or overly smoothed out. But I do want to walk around the face carefully at step one. This to me, this is my most important step because it's this step that actually gets the likeness and makes you see the two-dimensional image in 3 dimensions. And if I have a likeness at this step and it looks 3 dimensional, then the rest is a lot easier. I'm definitely not going to fix things in my future steps. My brush was not being cooperative. It was holding on to some pigment at the tip, and I had to kind of mess with that. You notice I do put a lot of diagonal strokes on it, and if I put a stroke going one direction, I'll often make the next stroke perpendicular to that stroke, just for the energy of it all, wanting this to look fresh and loose. When you get one area to a certain level of darkness, then you often have to go correct other areas because they just don't look like they measure up. Okay, so I saw some shadow on the right side of the face, and I often forget the ears. You treat them just like you would any part of the face, indicating the shadow shapes. She has some pretty dark areas. And I'm not doing anything with the left ear because it's just a little bit of flesh tone. I'll put that on in my last layer. And notice I'm touching a few areas that I thought got a bit harsh edged. I didn't want those to become the star of the show. I think when I'm aware I'm recording myself as a demo, I'm even more careful. Walking around the face one last time. Did I get it all? Normally, I don't deal with the eye color at all at step one. I do usually put a pass of blue in the whites of the eyes. However, because I'm dealing with a more complicated piece of information in with the glasses and the reflection, I decided to put a little pass of blue on the iris, as ran it right over the pupil and iris. um, and trying to work to save those white reflections from the glasses. So I'm putting a little bit of blue, and I will darken down the white of her eyes with a blue. Usually I'm using cobalt for that. If I want to go darker, I'll use ultramarine or even sometimes some indigo. And I also decided to just indicate a little bit of the glasses. She has wire frame glasses, and they have a dark and light side. I'm trying to, what I do with glasses is not make them regular looking. I want to see some variety in color, variety in value, and it's important to me to have a lost edge, at least in one spot, or at least close to a lost edge, so that the glasses don't rim the eyes in such a way that that's all you really see. So these were easy because there were some areas that really did get a lot lighter, especially down on the cheeks where the glasses touch the cheeks. So just stating a little bit of the glasses information right now to kind of get a feel. I'm using a little bit of indigo and a little bit of mineral violet for the glasses. So I decided to handle those at step one. I don't always do these as step one, but I thought it's kind of important to help you see her likeness. So I just put a little bit of info. I'm trying to keep that reflection, and I'm toning down the white of the eye with some cobalt right now. I'll be going back in and, of course, making the irises a lot darker and then adding the pupils in the next step. And I'm about to close out this step. I guess I just thought I needed to go a little darker in some spots. Okay, so here's my completed step one. Basically building up the shadow shapes using for the midtones and darker tones using alizarin and burnt sienna, or in many places just the burnt sienna. And I did give a little bit of information in the eyes and the glasses. So step two is where we put in our arbitrary colors, our colors that don't necessarily, um, you know, match what's found in nature. And this is also the step where I paint in the eyes. And I'm trying to be careful and work around the reflection in the glasses here. So I'm carefully painting some mid blue. I think I'm probably using ultramarine blue there to indicate the iris area and that reflection that goes over the skin a bit. So the right one's a little easier. There's only a little bit of a reflection. If I have just a gleam in the eye to deal with, I do try to paint around that. Um, but if I lose it in a quick sketch, I will come back in with some gouache, white gouache, and put it in. But I'm not putting a gleam in her eye since I've got those reflections from the glasses. And I'm also toning down the white of the eye a bit more. It's quite a bit of shadow happening from the lid and from the glasses and from the brow. So going in with more cobalt or ultramarine blue. Now this is actually speeded up just 1.5 times, so it's pretty much real time. I didn't want you to suffer through every single stroke. So I'm adding a little more color in the glasses while I'm waiting for the areas around the eyes to dry. Mostly um, mineral violet and indigo, and dealing with some of the shadows on either side. And remember, I said a lost edge or close to being a lost edge. At least some areas that are lighter are important when it comes to glasses, or they become what you immediately are drawn to when you look at the portrait. And usually I put some information in about the glasses and then I'll come back and restate that later. Remember, this is a quick sketch. I'm not trying to get every single piece of information. But having the glasses does complicate things. I've got the little nose pieces to deal with. I'm just putting a few marks for that. Simplifying is the name of the game when it comes to these. And the reason I encourage the whole quick sketch approach is that these don't have to take a long time. Normally, my quick sketches take me about an hour to paint. This one's taking longer because it is a more mature face, and I'm aware that I'm recording myself and trying to go into a little more detail. Plus, I have the complication of the glasses. I decided to fill in a little more information on that left eye. I didn't want it so obscured by the gleam, darkening the iris area a bit. I I'm putting a pass of Payne's gray for the pupil. And right now, of course, the pupil is way too much in contrast to the iris, but I want to kind of at least position it and see that I have it placed at the right spot before I go further with it. And I'll bring the color of the iris darker to match the darkness of the pupil. And of course, there's always a shadow cast from the upper eyelid onto the eye itself. And so I'll be darkening some of that with some darker blue, some ultramarine. Don't always get the eyes to match pupil wise right off the bat. I have to come in a couple of times. And I try not to go in with a sledgehammer with that Payne's gray at first. I work my way into it, making sure I have the iris in the proper spot. I mean, the pupil in the proper spot. And there's not much information regarding eyelashes. There's a little bit of a suggestion of eyelash on that left eye. So I'm just putting in some burnt sienna there and mostly just dealing with some shapes that I see. It's hard when you're painting a recognizable figure like this. Everyone knows what she should look like. So really important to get that likeness correct. She had that intense gaze, and I was trying to capture that. I think that's another one of the challenges when you've got a character like her who's so well known for her demeanor. You want to catch that as well. I'm putting a few strokes to indicate some lashes just with the burnt sienna on that right eye. And I'm darkening the iris area so that I can not have such a high contrast between the pupil and the iris. Notice I usually put vertical strokes down in that area. It makes me not deal with things so regularly. I didn't want to go round and round, and I have more control over the edges when I'm going up and down. And I like how uneven it makes things at the bottom. So I will be coming back into the eyes a couple of times, but I have a good start on them here. Usually takes a while to get the pupil dark enough too. I use such watery mixtures. I need to wait till it dries. I know you're watching paint dry. I need to keep talking. Um, the eyebrows are such a great place to play with color. I usually don't go too literally with color. I use some mineral violet and indigo often when that's a darker eyebrow. And I'll use a lot of my other arbitrary colors as well. I wanted to indicate the darker area. I don't usually finish the eyebrows in one pass. I'll put some pigment on and then let it dry, see how it's working, and then I'll add something else. Also, when you're dealing with the eyebrows, you want to have your strokes indicate the way the hair is growing. So I'm making sure I'm not just painting an arc. See, those strokes represent hair. Um, and you will also want to use your clean damp brush and touch the bottom of those eyebrows so that it doesn't look like they're just painted on, um, like caterpillars, or pasted on, I should say. They obviously are painted on. We're lighter toward the edge. I'm being a little more literal toward the outside, probably some burnt sienna there, but I'm using indigo and a little mineral violet on the darker areas of her eyebrows. Notice that her eyebrows don't really match perfectly the way, it's probably just her expression. That lower one's a little bit down further at the right one, I mean, is touching the glasses, whereas the left one is above the glasses. Now I'm going in with some of my arbitrary colors using the quinacridone magenta right now. You can see the puddle of it that I have over on the right-hand side of my palette. The quin magenta is great for handling areas that are really the darkest darks. So I am going over into some of the areas around her eye. And of course, we need to walk that color around the face. We need to echo that in other spots. And don't worry, it dries a little bit lighter than this, but I enjoy the entertainment of these arbitrary colors. It makes it, so much more interesting, I think, to look at a face that has something going on for it other than just the literal flesh tones. So I'm going to restate some of the darker shapes around her nose with the quinacridone violet. And in that cheek area, such a pretty color. And notice these strokes also echo the way that the shape of the face is. I want to make every stroke that I put down help inform you of the structure of the face. And the lips are another great place for the use of the quin violet for the shadow areas. With the lips, you can see that I do try to leave some lost edges and some white of the paper, at least in one spot. And I'm putting a little bit into the ears and some of the darker side of the face to indicate how it's shaped. Now I've only used the quin violet. I'll be coming in with the green and the blue in just a minute. I often call this my Christmas tree stage because I use this magenta and then I have a lot of hooker's green, which she begins to look a bit like Christmas. But it all tones down in the end. Adding some of these darker areas in her neck with the quin magenta. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking there. That got a little carried away. When I watch these videos after I've recorded them, I think, why did she make that decision? But too late then. Okay, so now um, I am adding a little bit of the peacock blue. It's a very turquoisey blue and it works well on a female or male face, young or old. Um, I like to use it on more mid-tone areas. For these arbitrary colors, I'm looking for mid-tone to darker areas. I'm usually not passing an arbitrary color completely over an area that's left white at this stage. Um, just trying to restate some of the midtones and darks. And I also don't like my left and right eye to be too matchy-matchy. If I use a blue on one side, I might go in with the hooker's green on the other. And often that spot between the eyebrows is a great spot for these arbitrary colors. If I try to bring it up from the eye area into the shadow above the eyebrows. And there's some hooker's green below her right eye. Yep, I'm using green on her nose to restate some of those midtones. Darkening in a few of the shadow areas with some more green or blue. It's hard for me to tell at this point. The hooker's green is so turquoise, and of course the peacock blue is very turquoise, so they're very similar. That passage green I just put on there was way too strong to have as a solid shape, so I'm touching it a little bit to vary the value that passed from her nose to the side of her mouth. And using some blue down here in the chin area, some of those darker tones. I just think it's so much more entertaining to have a variety of colors on the face. And these colors are very transparent, so you don't have to worry about overdoing them usually. Yeah, trying to decide how to deal with that glasses reflection there and the arbitrary colors because there's a bit of a shape behind there, but I don't want to overstate it. I did put the hooker's green in there though. Okay, I see I haven't tackled any area of the forehead yet with the arbitrary color, so I'll need to come in with something to make that area consistent with the rest of the face. Touching up some of the glasses area. I look around to see if it feels balanced, if it feels like I've got enough variety and enough of the spots covered with the arbitrary colors. I do keep the consistency pretty washy for these. And I'm restating a few of the darkest darks. Some of these lines that I thought were really important to give you her look and her expression. She had such a unique personality. I want to do her justice. No pun intended. So I'm finally dealing with the forehead, I see, with some peacock blue. And when I put down those strokes of arbitrary color, I try not to just leave all the edges the way I lay them down. I try to bring that shape of color up into another area. And also, I just added some arbitrary color on the ear. I don't want to neglect that area. It needs to be treated just like the rest of the face. Almost finished with step 2, which is taking quite a bit of time for this portrait. I'm indicating some of the darker areas of those earrings. I want those darker lines to dry so I can put some other color in there too. Usually in step 2, I have been putting a little bit of hair color in as well. Before I used to do that, I felt like I tacked the hair on as an afterthought, and it showed. So now I'm trying to put a little bit of color on in step 2 here, where I'm doing the arbitrary colors, just to see how the color of the hair will integrate with the colors I've got in the face. Another reason for doing the arbitrary color in step 2 rather than adding it on at the end is I can force myself to do it now. The face isn't feeling finished. And if I put this crazy color on, I'm not like wrecking something that looked finished to begin with. So it's just kind of a mental thing to force me to put those unusual colors in at this stage. It all will tone down in the next step. Okay, putting a little bit more information on the earrings. I think I kind of overpainted them, and needing to darken up the pupils. I want to get her intense gaze and restating some of the shadow that's cast by the upper lid onto the iris. I'm just using a little bit of indigo to do that, darken that area. Another thing I didn't mention regarding painting the eyes, I always touch the edges of the iris in a couple of spots so they don't have such a hard edge where the iris meets the white of the eye. I forgot to tell you that. All right, just walking around here, making some last touches. Making sure I'm really done. The only way I say that you know you're really done is when you post it on social media and then you go, oh my goodness, I wasn't finished. Why'd I do that? Oh well. So, I mentioned that I have been doing a little bit of work on the hair in step 2. So we're still on step 2. I am going to put a few strokes in to indicate some of the darker shapes in the hair. I'm using indigo. Her hair, I think at one time was a dark brown. I tend to like to use indigo and brown together. There's a part of her hair is reads as gray, like gray intermingled with the darker areas. So right now it's just indigo, and I'll be coming in with some mineral violet. Just wanted to indicate a little bit of the darker area of the hair so we can see how that's going to play with the face. And I'm touching a few the edges to soften in spots, and you definitely need to soften where you see the hair growing from the forehead. Anytime you see the hair actually growing from the skin, you need to make sure you don't have too many harsh edges, or it will look like the person is wearing a helmet. So I'm going to add a little more information on the dark right side where we have those dark shapes. You notice, of course, that I'm trying to make my strokes indicate the way the hair is growing or pulled back at least. Going in with some indigo and mineral violet. There was a bit of a brown cast to her hair too, so I'm adding some burnt umber in here. I really like the way burnt umber works with the indigo. There's a bit of a warmth to her hair too. At one time it was more brown. I think the brown works really well with the blues. Okay, I'd say I'm almost done with this step. Putting in a little bit more purples. It's amazing how boring it seems to me when you just deal with the literal hair color, because all you really need is the proper values. And here we have completed step 2. This was the arbitrary colors and a little bit of the hair. to see how those colors are going to work with the face colors. Now the last step is where I use the vermilion and the Winsor Yellow Deep to indicate flesh tones. So this is my last pass that I will be putting on, and I try, those are bold colors. They will dry so much lighter. This is vermilion and Winsor Yellow Deep. Notice how I put a stroke down and I often go perpendicular to that stroke. I'm looking at areas that I want to read as the lightest values, but not the white of the paper. So I will be passing over some of the areas that are now white of the paper. And I'm also passing these tones over areas that had some arbitrary color in places. It will tone down the color if I felt I got a little too raw with the color. So you see on the nose, I had indicated areas that I wanted to be just flesh tone, not white of the paper. So I'm being careful and deliberate with these strokes. I know these are the last strokes I'll be putting on the portrait, and they will be the strokes that really show. So I like to see the strokes. It's very important for me to think about the beginning and ending of a stroke and thinking about the way the stroke informs you of the shape of the face. So these areas that I'm putting the pigment on right now are the lightest tones that are not the white of the paper. So I've used my burnt sienna, and then I've used my burnt sienna alizarin to go really dark. I've added some arbitrary color that also helps darken some of the tones. And now my lightest value is my flesh tone, which is alizarin and, Winsor Yellow Deep and Vermilion. And I moved my reference on this video so that you could see that I place those colors next to each other. I don't mix up a puddle of them because I may want to grab from the more orangey side, or I may want to grab the more yellow part of the mixture. So I have them available separately there, and I can grab the exact shade that I want. And this is not speeded up at all. The last uh, two steps really weren't. So I'm looking for areas that I think need to be warmed up or need to be darkened in value by adding these flesh tones. I'm trying to be conscious of the fact that I want to leave some white of the paper in spots. So I'm trying not to cover over everything, being very deliberate about the strokes. So we're getting close to finishing up, putting a few last bits of the flesh tone on, and I still need to finish some on the hair. With the quick sketches, the hair is not done in any detailed manner. Neither is the clothing. I forgot about that little piece of the ear on the left. And I'm using a little mineral violet in the hair, along with the indigo I had in there. I just wanted to read dark, and I know these colors work well together. I do try to leave some sparkle of the white of the paper, even in an area that's predominantly dark, like that right side of her hair. And I just want to indicate how the hair kind of sweeps up and around the top of her head. I really don't like to see every little hair, lots of little hair strokes. I put put a little bit of something warm in there. I think I used some raw sienna because it looked to me like I was kind of reading a little bit of a brown cast to her hair yet. And remember, I mentioned that where you see the hair actually growing from the scalp, you need to soften those areas in spots. Okay, so I am going to need to be careful putting the dark blue, I'm using indigo for her robe, as it touches the face, because if I make a wrong move there, I could change her likeness. So if you've got a dark color, be it hair or clothing or whatever, that's butting up against the jawline or the face line in any way, you've got to be really careful there. I'm just going to indicate some dark blue here and a little bit of the negative shapes in her collar. I definitely don't want to hit every little shape, just kind of suggesting some shapes. I know it's hard for me to watch this not speed it up. Okay, let's finish up. This is more detail than I actually usually do on clothing, but kind of figured her collar merited some standing out. And of course, I've got the picture of her over top of the right side. Okay, I have a few last little details to deal with on the collar and the clothing, and I need to finish up on the hair. And I have not added the little bit of quinacridone coral that I like to do at the very end. So I will be doing those details right now. I think I got her a little mean looking. So those little strokes I just put down are quinacridone coral. I love that color. It just adds a little bit of glow, kind of a punch. At the end, I put it on areas that I feel need to be a little more rosy. Works well on the lips as well, too. Remember, I'm trying to keep a lost edge on that left part of the lip. Put some on the chin. Um, and I guess that's about it. A little more on the lips. I don't like to leave the lips with just one or two colors. I do like to add in some additional colors. Usually brilliant orange makes a nice statement on the lips. So I did finish up a few details in the hair and the collar to get the final result here. So this is the second time I've painted her. Kind of interesting to do this without looking at the first one, but they are very similar. So hope this has helped you think about the different things that we talked about relating to painting a more mature person. You know, the glasses, leaving a lost edge somewhere in the glasses, um, dealing with the wrinkle lines by simplifying, just picking out a few that we wanted to highlight. Um, with older faces, we often have to deal with white hair, but with Ruth's hair, I did use a lot more of the indigo. So there you have it. Hope this has been helpful.